Hey, it's Karina Reichman, and you are listening to Comes a Time with Oteil Burbridge and Mike Fenoya. If you're digging the podcast, do these guys a favor and review and subscribe. It means a lot. Be sure to follow the pod on social media, YouTube, and if you're joining for bonus episodes and exclusive content, go to patreon.com/comesatimepod and get on the bus. And now, here's Mike and Oteil.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of Comes a Time podcast. That's Oteil.
And that is Mike. We had a really good one this week. Mr. Kirk West, who I met when I first joined the Almond Brothers. They called him the tour mystic. He did like the guest list and a lot of different things. You could really like define what his job was, but he was also the band photographer for many years and shot all the pictures that were ever shot since I joined, including
such beautiful stuff, man.
Yeah, the first band pictures I ever took with them. So for me, he's like the Jay Blakesberg of the Almond Brothers band and has so many stories. I mean, he saw the original band with Dwayne and Barry a bunch of times way back when. And he also built the Almond Brothers Museum in Macon, Georgia, which I think is really incredible. We were talking about in the podcast, there's a lot of musicians that don't have their own museum, like Miles Davis or John Coltrane or Duke Ellington. I mean, we could go on and on. People that have changed American history. And it happened kind of organically in the beginning because he's just like has the collector gene.
Yeah.
And then he was like, hey, I got enough stuff to like have an actual museum if I corral it all together, you know? So it's really great fun and fun for me because I learned things that I didn't know. You could be on the road with somebody for years and not know a lot of stuff because you're just kind of in the moment and dealing with whatever you're dealing with at the time. And so it was really fun for me, even though I've known him for a really long time.
You could tell right away how, I mean, genuine and like heartfelt he is, you know, throughout the entire conversation. And prior to having him on, I went and looked up a whole bunch of stuff that he did, Almonds and otherwise, and like some of the shots he's done are just out of this world, you know. And he explains, and I like that we got into it where he kind of talks about, you know, how he preferred to shoot bands that he didn't like and some of the other cool little snippets that he gave. But this is a dude that was game. You could tell like he's someone who, you know, all the way going back to like maybe our second or third episode when we talked with Mountain Girl about like people that are game, you know, like that's what makes this world so interesting. And, you know, Kirk's definitely one of them. So it was really awesome having him on. And I think we barely scratched the surface, right? We didn't even get into like the Detroit blues stuff or anything. So
dude, like he had to because he spent all that time in Chicago, Southside Chicago, and going through those photos of his, he was there at the time. All the money, all the like everything.
It's so great, the stuff that he did.
Yeah, it was really cool. And then all the country stuff. He has my favorite shot of Tom Waits that I've ever seen. There's like all this other stuff, but he really if you get a chance, if you're ever in Macon, Georgia, or if you're ever in Atlanta, drive down there. It's not that far.
Check it out.
Go see the Almond Brothers Museum. And,
for sure.
It's like spurred other things now. I think he said Little Richard's got one going now, and Otis Redding, and some of the other places that were integral to the Almond Brothers story, like Capricorn Studios, the H&H Kitchen, where that old black lady, Mama Louise, fed them when they didn't have no money, and all she required was that they didn't come in all messed up on drugs. One time someone did, and she made them sit out back. I was like, how's that? The old black lady making the white dude sit out back and making Georgia eat because he was too high. But she still fed him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, this woman's good as gold, man. So it's just good stuff. You guys will really enjoy that one.
Thank you, Kirk, for joining us. What a fun time. And thank you guys for listening. We're here on Pantheon's podcast network, and we have a lot of great stuff going on for you. So like, share, subscribe, join our YouTube channel, join our individual YouTube channels. I have my special Don't Let Me Down on mine. Oteil's sharing amazing tracks from Lovely View of Heaven on his. Patreon.com/comes a time pod. All the places. Join us, like us. You know the routine, folks. We got merch. We got cups. We got t-shirts. We got koozies. We got
hats.
Fun things. Hats.
Yeah, come on, whatever you want. Come get
it. Thank you. Enjoy and take care. Peace.
Yeah, we just start going, man.
Okay.
But it is good to see you, man. How are you feeling today? How's the weather there today?
Oh, it's lovely. It's a lovely fall day in Macon, Georgia. It'll be about 80 degrees, and it was 50 degrees when I got up this morning, and everything's lovely, you know.
I love it.
I'm happy to be here.
Man,
we're happy to have you.
For sure. We had Jay Blakesberg on a while back, and we got so many, as you can imagine, crazy stories. And I said, man, I know someone that's got just as crazy.
I got a story or two.
Yeah, I mean, some we can't even tell.
yeah, we're still in I'm in an adult mode right now. I'm not trying to talk shit.
Adult mode.
Well, one thing I want to know is, how did you first meet the Almond Brothers? Because I know I want to do a part like Chicago blues, part the country thing, all of it. But I know the Almond Brothers was how did you first meet them?
Well, I was a fanboy from the beginning. I saw the brothers play about a dozen times before Dwayne was killed. And
Wow.
But back then, I wasn't actually a photographer. I was just a hippie with a camera. And I learned pretty early that if I was going to take good pictures, I couldn't be very high. And and I wanted to be just as high as I could be to see the Almond Brothers. And so I never took a picture. I never took a camera to an Almond Brothers show. I have unbelievable pictures of Country Joe and the Fish and Pacific Gas and Electric, but who gives a shit, right? And so then Dwayne died. I was in serious long-term drug rehab in October of '71. And I heard Dwayne died. And then I was still in there when Barry died. It was long-term, and I was a big mess. But I got out, and I hadn't really known him. The rules were much different. Backstage access, they played a lot of places that didn't have that kind of thing. So I was in the general vicinity, but I didn't know Dwayne or Barry, never really met him. But, so 73 came around, I got out of rehab, and I hightailed it to San Francisco. I had been floating around quite a bit. I had grown up in a little town in Iowa and moved to Chicago right out of high school. And because that's where the blues was. My eyes had been totally open, and my ears were like, I got into the Paul Butterfield Blues Band while I was still in high school. And I didn't know shit about the blues in Iowa. I mean, I was a country boy. And so I knew all about the Everly Brothers and Johnny Horton. But I didn't know much about, Hound Dog Taylor. So I get to Chicago and I jump in with both feet and started to point cameras at musicians. And I learned, and I saw the brothers the first time in February of 1970 at a little club in Chicago. It was in the Rush Street Entertainment District. It was a place called Beavers. And it was downstairs on a low ceiling, and they were loud as hell. And me and a couple of buddies of mine, we had fake IDs because it was a 21 drinking age, and we were 18, 19 years old. So we would go in and try to hustle chicks, you know. But the brothers, these guys, we didn't know who they were, and they were so loud. They looked like us, but you couldn't really talk because it was so loud. And so we split, and then about 3 or 4 weeks later, some reasonably short time, I was at a friend's house, and back then, everybody put their albums leaned up against the baseboard, you know, they're just on the floor next to the stereo. And so there'd be these whole stacks of albums laid up against the wall. And there was that album. There was those boys that we saw, the Almond Brothers. I put it on, and that record just changed my life. And I went out the next day and bought 2 copies. One I left home, and one I took everywhere I went. And then that was in February 1970, and in that whole summer of 1970, I spent the whole summer selling drugs at rock festivals. And
yeah.
we got in the car, 3 of us got in the car and drove to Atlanta, or to Macon, and we're at Atlanta Pop Fest in 1970, and that's where I really got hooked. I saw the brothers 2 or 3 times that weekend, and then came back and
Can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Did you see the Colonel at that festival? Did you see Colonel Bruce?
No, not that I recall. They you know, it was huge and floating around, and I was, you know, tripping and shit, and I don't really know. I actually have a tape of the Hampton Grease Band from that performance. That's remarkable. It's like they do Wolverton Mountain and all kinds of crazy shit, you know. But yeah, when I was working on that Atlanta Pop record project that we put out, I also dug into a lot of the audio of the festival itself. And the guy that had it gave me, I got the tapes of both brothers set on the main stage, and then the Hampton Grease Band he gave me. So I ended up giving that to Bruce. He said, "Yeah, that's hell. That was horrible." Okay, Bruce. Whatever. I loved you. So.
That's great.
So anyway, you know, go ahead.
How did you end up meeting them? Like,
well, after they broke up, because, you know, by the time I started seeing them again in '73, they were like, you know, getting to be the biggest band in the country. And so the access was pretty raggedy. You know, I shot them a couple, 3 times, but I just bought tickets and went to the show and took pictures. And so after they broke up in '76, I had established myself in Chicago. I had sobered up, moved back to Chicago, and started shooting pictures for money. You know, I had a little crew of guys that invited me to join them. It was an outfit out of Chicago called Photo Reserve. And so we were shooting everything in town, you know, big shows, blues shows. I was the only guy that cared about country music, so I saw all the country shows. But at that time, you know, they were all they fractured, and they were playing little places. Butch had a band called Trucks, and they played a club in the suburbs of Chicago. And I got, you know, I mean, it's easy access. There we are. Here, how you doing, Butch? And Dickie did the same kind of thing. Now, before I moved back to Chicago, I had started shooting pictures of musicians with some serious intent. And I shot one of the very first Dickie Betts and Great Southern shows. I got sober again in West Palm Beach, and he was down there working all over the East Coast of Florida. And so I shot him several times and got to meet them. We weren't friendly yet, but it was a, hey, how you doing? Here's some nice pictures of you. And I'd always learned that if you give pictures to people that you have already photographed, that, you know, it makes them feel good about themselves. And I lost the light here. Okay. So when I got back to Chicago, I met a few. Greg was still laying real low, but I got to know Dickie and Butch and Jamo. And then when they, and along that time, I was really doing a lot of record company work. And so I reached out to Capricorn down here in Macon and ended up shooting a lot of publicity stuff and stuff around Chicago for Capricorn, the Dixie Dregs and Sea Level and things like that.
Yeah.
And so when in '79, when the brothers hit it on tour again, I was locked in with Capricorn, and I got, good photo passes and tour access and stuff like that. And so it was during that period of time, the spring of '79 is really when I nailed down my relationship with them. They had played a couple nights at the Uptown Theater in Chicago, and after the show, Dickie said, let's go out, let's go see some blues." So I took him over to the Kingston Mines, where my friend Junior Wells was playing, and they all sat in with Junior.
Wow.
Dickie and Greg and Jim Essery, who was playing harmonica with him that tour. And I got great shots of them playing with Junior and Phil Guy and that whole the whole Chicago blues thing. And then the next night, Dickie wanted to go see some country music, so I took him to a little uptown honky tonk called Mr. Kiley's, and there was kind of a Western swing band playing, and Greg
nice.
went this time, so there's they played all kinds of stuff. So it was as a result of that weekend. And then I'm jumping on the bus and going to Michigan or going to Indiana with them, stuff like that. And so '79 and '80, I really nailed down the relationship, and started getting Christmas cards. And I was working as a promotional guy for a custom cowboy hat company called Charlie One Horse, and and they were great hats. They were, they were hats that cost you $400 or $500 in 1980, which was a lot of money to put on your
That's
head.
a lot.
Bet it came with a nice hat box.
Oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
And so I'd have I knew, I put hats on the Oak Ridge Boys and Mickey Gilley and all kinds of shit like that.
I love
And so
it.
I had custom hats made for Dickie and Greg and Butch, and Butch's at that time, his hotel alias was Hamilton Burger. He's very esoteric, Butch was, and so I made him a hat with a little hamburger on the front of it. He loved it.
Nice.
So anyway, it was during that period of time that I really tightened everything down. And then they broke up again in '82. And that's when I really made my move to really get it. And because I was going to do a coffee table book of their photography. And I hadn't shot them before '73. So I said, Red Dog, you got pictures? And so I was just searching pictures for this book.
Interesting.
And I went to Dickie's, and Dickie said, well, shit, man, nobody's ever written our story. Why don't you write it? And, what was I, 31, 32? And I didn't know enough about writing books to know that I couldn't. So I said, sure, I'll do that. And then I started doing interviews. In addition to searching stuff out, and I'd go to Butch's house and spend 4 or 5 days digging through his stuff and talking to him, put everything on tape. And over the course of 4 years, I did over 300 hours of interviews with these guys. And
wow.
they were all broken up. They were not playing together necessarily, and there was no real hope for a future, to be honest with you. And so they were really candid, and I'd gotten to know them. We were friends, and it wasn't like a journalist quizzing them on their history. It was like a friend talking about, how'd this happen,
Yeah.
And then I never did the book, put that shit away. This was when they got back together in '89. And I'd gone out on the road with Greg, the Almond band in the '80s, and Dickie's great Southern stuff. And then he had a band called BHL and T, and I went out on the road with them. But when they reformed towards the end of the '80s, I was locked in. And I had actually worked with Bill Levinson in '88, because throughout those years in the '80s where I was gathering material and doing interviews, I also copied everything that I came across. And I had like a copy camera and a Xerox machine and all kinds of tape recorders. So, I stayed at Dickie's house for a couple of weeks and copied everything he had, paper, pictures, and tape that I could. I couldn't copy anything larger than quarter-inch, half-inch tape, reel-to-reel stuff.
Yeah.
I had those kind of machines with me. But the 2-inch, and so I gathered all this stuff. And when Levinson at Polygram started to work on a Brothers box set, he had had big success with the Clapton box set, the Crossroads box set. And through politics and business, Polygram ended up with all the master tapes from Capricorn. And Bill was looking around, and there was no Almond Brothers manager at that time, but my name kept coming up. He'd talk to Steve Mazzarski, or he'd talk to so-and-so, and they'd say, oh, yeah, Kirk's got all that stuff. He knows where that shit is. So I got involved with Bill, and we did the Dreams box set. And then in '89, the spring of '89, when it was a 20th anniversary box, right? And so they decided to get together and do a tour just to promote that box set. Well, it stuck. They hired Woody and Warren and Johnny Neal and went out. And I did the first year, '89, I just did nothing but photography all over the East Coast. Didn't go to the West Coast with them, but up and down the East Coast and through the Midwest. And then they went to Florida to do record 7 Turns. And I went down there and shot all the stuff, album cover, promo stuff, spent the whole month down there while they were recording.
Now, was that Burt Reynolds' place, or was that the next
no,
one
this was
back
at
where it all
Criteria.
begins?
This was at Criteria.
Okay.
So everybody was down there and working with Dowd, and I shot everything.
Now here, where I am.
In the control room, in the recording, everywhere. And I went out in the spring of '90, then, after the record was recorded, I go out and I was just going to shoot pictures for 3 weeks. And they had signed a deal with Danny Goldberg's Gold Mountain Management Company out in LA. And Danny, they hired a tour manager that was a young guy and didn't know the band didn't know him. And he'd been out tour managing with Bang Tango and, Haircut 100 and shit like that. And he was young, and he thought, he was there for about a week of rehearsals. They rehearsed for a month in Bradenton and shot a video for Good, Clean, and Fun and all this stuff. And then the young man shows up to watch him rehearse, and then we went out on the road, and I was just going to shoot pictures for the first leg. And the third day of the tour, Dickie comes to me and says, we're going to hire you to be his assistant. I said, what are you talking about? I don't know nothing about tour managing. He said, yeah, but you know how to talk to people. And this son of a bitch, if he talks to me like that one more time, I'm just going to cut his tongue out of his mouth and send him on his way. And so he wants us to do something. He'll tell you, you come tell us. Because he was young and thought if he talked loud, he could get Dickie and Butch to move a little faster, right? Well, that's how that paid out. So I spent the rest of that 3-week leg telling people what time it was. Okay, Dickie, let's go. It's time to get on stage. Shit like that. And so at the end of that leg, they were going to get a new guy, and then I was going to come back out and shoot pictures. Well, that new guy was Bert Holman. And he had worked. Bert had worked for John Scher, and had worked with BHLT, so they knew him, and he was just working as the tour manager. And so I come back out on this next leg, and after about 3 days, Bert says, "Listen, I can't. We're in the West Coast. We're going to go into San Francisco and LA, and he says, I can't do this without you. I'll pay you out of my pay if they won't hire you to do that." And so he paid me for 2 days, and then Dickie found out, said, fuck that. And so I signed up and stayed there as the assistant tour manager for another year and a half until they made Bert the manager. They got rid of Danny Goldberg and that whole team, and they made him the manager. And he stayed out there forever. He's still the manager of the business. And after about a year and a half, I climbed the ladder a little bit, and I really didn't like the title assistant anything.
Yeah, that's a hard gig too.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Especially when you're friends, with the band and friends with the, you kind of have to like go from being friends and flip a switch and go like, all right, guys, for real, like we got to do this. And then they're like, you're our friend. You don't, that's hard.
Well, see, and that blew up in my face when I started shooting all their album covers, because the first, I did the 7 Turns, that worked great. And then we did Shades of Two Worlds in Memphis. And Dickie Dickie was the one that had the graphic design in his mind. And we worked up the cover for 7 Turns. He said, this is, one of the coolest things of my whole life. We're sitting there at Criteria, and Dickie had conceived that it was going to be 7 Turns was going to be the name of the record, because that was a mystical concept with the Navajo Indians and with the Zen people and stuff. So 7 Turns, what are we going to do? And he took me out in the lobby of Criteria with an acoustic guitar, and he sat down. He said, this is what I'd like the album cover to look like. And he sang me 7 Turns acoustically in the lobby. And it was done. He said, that's what I want the album cover to look like. Okay. So I spent 2.5 days driving around the swamps of Florida trying to find a thing that would say that, and off Alligator Alley, we found a little side road next to a canal. And so we all went out there and shot these great pictures, had Red Dog bailing water out of the canal, and there were alligators in there. Shit. And so that went well. They loved it. So we go to Memphis the next year, and I took 3.5 days of their time to shoot pictures. I shot them in West Memphis, Arkansas. I shot them in all over Memphis. And, I was pretty full of myself, and they let me do it. And I've got great pictures. Absolutely the best pictures I probably ever took of the Almond Brothers was the cover shot of Shades. And so the next time I shot an album cover, they gave me 45 minutes.
That's just so great for me because, both the Dead and the Almond Brothers are the absolute worst about photography sessions. And the complaining and not cooperating makes it take so much longer, But I always wonder, like, where did that start? Now I know where. They had to do it for 3 days, and now they're like,
I've seen
Kirk.
No, that was exactly it. Now we shot that first set, second set in the driveway of the Orpheum in Boston, right where so we pulled the bus right into by the front door, changed the marquee. And everything was set up, lights, everybody. I had the bus drivers doing my, they were the stand-ins, but I literally had all 7 of the guys for 45 minutes.
Too funny. Yeah, the backlash was eternal, actually. But you know what I love about this is that I could see that the seeds already of you starting the museum.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people don't realize. Some may not realize there is an Almond Brothers Band museum, but that museum you used to live in, it was your house, and that was the old Almond Brothers Band house back in the day.
Yeah.
Talk about how you came to live in that house.
Okay. During the 80s, when I was doing all that traveling around and research and then, interviewing and stuff, I came through Macon a number of times, and one time I came through and there was a for sale sign in the front yard of the big house. And I'd never actually been in it. So I just called the realtor number and told him I was interested in buying the house. And this is 1987 or 88. And So the house was empty, and I photographed every room of the house, every angle of the outside of the house, the backyard, everything, and then
Yeah.
just drove off, right? And so that was 80, I think 88 and 87 maybe. So I'm out there on the road. We get the fall of 92 was the second GABA Fest. GABA is the Georgia Almond Brothers Band Association. It's just a nonprofit fan club, basically. And the second GABA Fest was held at a hotel in Macon, and we were on the road. So a friend of mine who had a minivan, and we loaded it up with bootleg T-shirts and swag that I'd gathered, and posters and all kinds of stuff. And we drove down to GABA. And while we were down here in 92, it was October 92, Chank Middleton, Greg's best friend, came to me and said, "Listen, man, I know the folks that live in the big house. You want to take a little walk through?" And I said, "Absolutely." So about half a dozen of us gathered up, and Chank took us over to the house. And it was a lovely African-American family that lived there. Couple, 3 kids. She was an educator, and he was a lawyer. And he was a pretty bitter 40, 50 something black dude who had basically been shit on by the old boy network here in Macon. And he bought the house for $8,000, which was basically paid the back taxes for the house. It was sold on the courthouse steps.
Wow.
And the house was in terrible shape. And he took, first thing he did was get a second mortgage on it, and took that money and invested it with a guy. And they were trying to open a little, they bought 3 Victorian houses that were just down the street on Vineville. And they were going to turn it into the Georgia Music Hall of Fame, which didn't exist at that time. And his partner was like a Jewish concert promoter and businessman that moved down from Connecticut. And so the two of them had this great idea, and they spent the money and they bought these houses, and the whole deal. There was a little amphitheater in the backyard of one of them, and Widespread played there, and the Indigo Girls, and a lot of bands like that, Driving and Crying. They had this idea, and they told the mayor, they told the local congressman about their idea, and they stole the idea. What they did is they stole the idea and said, "Yeah, the Georgia Hall of Fame, Music Hall of Fame, needs to be in Macon, but not with these guys' houses." And they moved it downtown. They did built a whole new building, and so Cedric was really upset. You know, he'd gambled and they took it away from him. So he'd sat in the back porch, little back porch of the house. His wife was giving us this tour. It was lovely. And I came home from that little trip and pulled out those proof sheets and showed them to Kirsten. Now, Kirsten and I had been married a little over a year at that time. And we were looking to get out of Chicago and do something together. She had a life that didn't blend with mine necessarily, and mine with hers. But we were deeply in love and married right away. And so I showed her these proofs. She says, "Oh, that's it. That's our future. Let's buy that house, go down there and open a rock and roll bed and breakfast." And I said, "Okay, sounds good." So in January of that year, next year, 93, we go down there. And that's when Cedric told me, he said, "Look, you're going to give me what I want for this house, or I'm going to let it fall down around my shoulders, because it's a big house and we don't need all these rooms. We'll just close them off." And what he wanted turned out to be twice what the house in its condition appraised for. And, we said to hell with it. And so through the help of Bill Luckadoo, He hooked us
Bill
up with
Luckett.
oh yeah, he opened several doors that we needed open. The finance company, contractors to rebuild. And when we walked down there and told Cedric that we were going to give him his $165,000 for a house that appraised for 80, he about fell out of his folding chair, because he really didn't think. He said, in the negotiation, he said, "Yeah, this town wants me out of here and wants somebody like you in here. They'll do whatever they can to get me out of here." And I told his wife, who was absolutely a lovely woman. She says, "You're not buying one house, you're buying two houses. You're buying this from us for you, and then you're buying that other one for us, because that's what happened." And I didn't want, she said to us, she said, "Why don't you just rent a house, come down here, you'll be able to buy this house off the courthouse steps like we did in another year, because we're going bankrupt." And I didn't want to do that to these people. And so we didn't, and we
That's
got
awesome.
it and spent all our money that we had to renovate it. And that's how we got it. I asked the guys in the band, I said, "Listen, do you mind if we buy this house and kind of turn it into a bed and breakfast?" And because that was the goal. Move down here, have 3 guest rooms, Dwayne's, Barry's, and Greg's old bedrooms, and use them as a bed and breakfast. And we were going to call it Disgraceland and stuff like that. And so they said, "No, you go ahead and do that. We don't know why you want to live in fucking Macon, but go ahead."
Nah.
So
Rock and roll
that's
bed and
how it
breakfast.
came to be. And then for 14 years we had a stealth museum. It was like,
Yeah, because you used to have people come in from all over the world.
Oh yeah, in 14
show up
years
on your
we had over 20,
doorstep, and
we
you
had
would let them
20,000
in.
people. Oh, it was crazy. Yeah. And I was gone a lot, because once the Mule created themselves in 94 at the big house, they moved in, and for 10 days they worked all their new music up. They played their first real show downtown at the Liz Reed's Music Hall. And so, through those years, I was gone with the brothers, and then during the first 3 years of the Mule, I would get off the brother bus and get on the Mule bus, and so Kirsten was home all the time. And over the course of those 14 years, we had well over 20,000 people knock on the door. And
wow.
Yeah, it was very cool. And Japanese tourists at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, and we had a whole carload of drunken Polish soccer fans showed up at midnight one night. And but I tell you, the 2 rooms that we had set aside as the museum, we call them the archive rooms, and stuff wasn't behind glass. It was like there was a satin shirt that Clapton had given Dwayne during Layla. Not the one everybody knows. It was like a gold and purple tie-dyed satin. And Dwayne had given it to Kim Payne, and Kim Payne gave it to me, and I had it hanging on a hanger. You could put that shirt on. You could touch it. You could, had one of Greg's old B3s and a Leslie, and you could turn that sucker on and play it. And all those years, not one thing was ever stolen.
That's amazing.
And Kirsten never had an awkward, uncomfortable moment with strangers walking in. And I always said, people don't steal from church. They're pilgrims. They're here to, pay tribute. So, and that's how we got it. And then after a while, Kirsten got tired of answering the door, and so we tried to sell it to a couple wealthy people that loved it, but their wives didn't want to leave Charlottesville, Virginia, and move to Macon, which I can understand.
Yeah.
So we formed this foundation in 2005, a nonprofit charitable foundation, and we started raising money, tax deductible donations, and I'd say at least 75% of the money we raised came from New York Wall Street guys.
The Beacon Theater runs.
Oh yeah, that whole crew, man. I mean, one man individually contributed over $250,000 himself, and our friend Julie Orland was very, very key in the fundraising efforts. So
Yeah.
it took us about 3 years to raise the money for the foundation to be able to buy the house. And I had my collection of memorabilia was appraised by a outfit out of New York City that did that for collections and rock memorabilia. And the collection appraised at $2 million. And so the foundation paid for a quarter of that, and we donated the rest of it, and
Right.
then they bought the house outright. And it took another year and a half, maybe 2 years to complete the rebuild of the house. And it opened as the Almond Brothers Band Museum in December of 2009. And then there was the grand opening in April of 2010. And I'll never forget, Oteil, you came to our house that day.
Yeah, man.
Because through bullshit and aggro and stuff, Kirsten and I were asked. Well, we weren't asked. We were told not to show up at the ribbon cutting. And you and Quinones came to our house that day. Means the world to me to this day.
Yeah, man.
What you guys did. So anyway, I'm an old man and I get a little sappy sometimes.
Hey, man, I have on this podcast many times, man.
Young men get sappy too. It's okay.
Yeah. That was a lot of shit that went down, and but after all, when it's all said and done, which I firmly believed at that time, and Quinones did too, and that was part of why we came. That's on top of the fact that we love you and we are advocates. We fly the West flag, but I knew, I was like, you did something that has rarely been done. Like so many of my heroes, so many. There ain't no Miles Davis museum that I know of.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not a Duke Ellington museum people that should have a museum, they're certainly worthy of one.
There's no Grateful Dead
that.
museum. Yeah, there's no Grateful Dead. There's no band, no.
Yeah. And I thought, this is going to stand. This is something that you created. And it's so great to hear the organic way that it happened now, because you just got that collector gene.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I knew it was going to stand.
I built a museum out of dumpster diving.
But what a great one! Like in out of that dumpster, there's this T-shirt that Clapton gave Dwayne, and a bunch of other unbelievable. One man gathers what another man spills.
And another thing is, you got that appraisal from a New York company, but they can't put a price tag on the memories and on the life and on the experiences that you've had.
Journey. And I knew all that was going to outweigh whatever present political bullshit that was going on.
Yeah.
And that's how history is. And now look, what you did, that all came around eventually.
Well, you know what, Oteil, it's like, Kirsten took it real hard. I obviously took it real hard, but I was able to process it. I said, there's a long game in this, and I'm going to outlive the sons of bitches anyway. And, and I have. So, I'm over there all the time. I'll sit in the gift shop and tell stories. I don't want to be the greeter at the casino, washed up boxer or something, but no, I'm proud. It's become the second most visited tourist destination in Middle Georgia. The first one is the Indian Mounds, which is going to become a national park. And but it's also the big house was the instigation, was the catalyst for the entire community of Macon to fully embrace again their musical heritage. There is now a Otis Redding Museum. There's the Little Richard Museum. There's the Capricorn Records Museum.
Yeah.
They bought and remodeled Grant's Lounge, the Capitol Theater, the H&H. All those things are now part and parcel with the whole community effort to brand this Macon, Georgia, just like Memphis or Muscle Shoals, more than Muscle Shoals, because Muscle Shoals is just history. But there's a lot of music tourists down here now, lots of them, and Kirsten and I full well know that we kicked that can first. Yeah,
absolutely.
So it's worked out.
It's like a tree roots. You know what I mean? And I could see it back then. Now I find out, this whole 20th anniversary project that you were doing with Levinson has really kind of got the band back together.
Yeah.
You've had a really instrumental part, and that can never be taken back. Like, that is what it is. That's part of Almond Brothers history. And now you also have the photography studio also, right? Where you're...
Oh yeah, we opened 9 years ago. It'll be 9 years in January that we've been open, Gallery West.
Nice.
And we were just going to do a little pop-up. We had done those pop-ups during the Beacon run, the final Beacon run in March and October of 2014. And we had our little pop-up at the sushi bar across the street in the basement, and it was just amazing, right? Sold a lot of pictures, made a lot of connections. And so we came home from that in October and thought, let's have a little pop-up in Macon. Maybe we can sell some Christmas presents, And we found a space, but it wasn't quite done yet. And it didn't get done until January. So we missed Christmas altogether. And we had but we've been open 9 years in the same spot, and we've sold pictures and books and had other people's photography exhibits and book signings and concerts and because we're part of that little tourism thing too. Gallery West is now we're an event during GABA. It's all kinds of stuff. Nice. It's like nice.
I love checking out your photos. It's like me and a buddy were goofing around about bad headshots, and how even as a baseball card collector as a kid, I never liked the pictures where the player just had like one knee and his bat on the knee or posing like he's about to pitch. I like the action shots of sliding head first into home and there's dust everywhere. And, and I look at concert photos and I get like immediately like transposed to that moment. And I think about like how loud it was, what it smelled like, the people around you when you were taking that photo and stuff, and I really appreciated the variety. Like, you have some shots of Iggy Pop where he looks like a caterpillar.
Yeah.
And then there's like Mark Knopfler, like, who I think is one of the most underrated players ever. And you have him like just appreciating one of his own notes, I feel, Did you approach each artist or each gig or whatever the same way? Or did you approach each one differently? Like, I'm always fascinated with that with photography. I know some people just snap and they, spray and pray, kind of, I think they call it. It seems everything seems very, methodical with how you did it.
Well, here's the deal. Number one, 95% of what I sell was all shot on film. And so you didn't know what you got until the next day when you processed the film and looked at the neg.
Nice. Yeah.
And you only had 36 shots anytime, Now you can take 10 rolls of film with you, but you didn't have the ability to shoot nonstop. I mean, there were motor drives, you still ran out in 36 shots,
Right.
And so I approached it with that kind of thing in mind. It's a matter of anticipating. I mean, I got this picture of Bob Marley where all his dreads are like,
so great, man.
And,
so great.
And, that's the shot I was looking for, but I wasn't sure when I went home that I had it. I thought I did, but I wasn't sure. Yeah. Was it in focus? Yeah, well, of course it was. But I approached things, and to be honest with you, it was harder for me to shoot bands that I really liked than it was the people, like I didn't give a shit about Iggy Pop or Van Halen. That wasn't my music. But so I could be completely objective. I could look only at what I'm seeing. Now, if I'm shooting somebody like Marshall Tucker or Delbert McClinton, the music's in me while they're playing it. So it's difficult, especially with the brothers.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a photographer friend of mine who shot the dead every time she could shoot the dead. And a lot of others, Bonnie Raitt and other blues people and stuff. But every picture that she sells, she says what song they're playing. How the fuck do you know that?
Amazing.
You have an assistant taking notes? I mean, good Lord. And I know she's not a player, so Dickie Betts could look at his fingers on his guitar and say, "Well, that's what I'm playing." I know that.
Right.
The music that really connected with me was much more difficult to shoot than music that didn't. I mean, I have great pictures of Phil Collins,
I saw those. Yeah.
Who gives a shit?
You got a couple Little Feat shots in there that I was just like, I love Little Feat.
Oh yeah,
so.
I knew Lowell pretty good. I'll tell you a weird story about Lowell. It was after he was out. He was doing his "Thanks I'll Eat It Here" tour in the spring of '79, and he was doing 2 shows at the Park West, which was it was an old porn theater that they renovated and turned into a high-end nightclub.
Nice.
Called the Park West. Held about 900 people, and so Lowell came in with his band, solo band, and did 2 shows, early and late. And I knew Lowell a little bit because the Waiting for Columbus tour, I did a bunch of shooting there, and they even gave me a jacket because I kept wanting to hear Fat Man in the Bathtub, and so they made me a jacket that said "Spot Check Billy." It was a killer. It was like a high school letter jacket,
like a varsity jacket.
Varsity jacket.
Nice.
Right. And
Spot check Billy.
So I'm shooting the show, and during between the early and late show, I go up to the dressing room, and there was a balcony outside the dressing room, and the house was dark, and they were cleaning up and setting the tables and shit, and so just me and Lowell out there, and he says, "Hold out your hand." And so I hold my hand out like this. He said, no, like this. Okay, so there is, I don't know what, there's nothing that he's going to put on the top of my hand that I'm going to want. It's not like, because I was, number one, this is '79. I was 4 years sober. All right. Hadn't done drinking, drugs, nothing. And so he dumps out a little pile of blow on my hand right here, and then does his. Now here I'm standing in the dark with a hero. He's more of a hero than he is a friend,
Yeah.
I mean, we're friendly, and he's sharing his blow with me. What the fuck am I gonna do? I mean, am I gonna blow 4 years of sobriety because I don't want to turn down my hero? So what I did, I quick as I figured it out. Okay, wait till he brings his hand up to snort his. I brought my hand up and blew rather than inhaled.
Yeah, way to go.
And he says, "You want another bump?" I said, "No, man, I'm good." Well, so we spent the rest of the intermission, hanging out. And I shot some pictures of him. There's a great picture I got of him with a big grinning face, and he's high as a little monkey. And but you know what? 2.5 weeks later, he was dead because that blow gave him a heart attack. And, and so I had that moment, and thank God I made the right call. And, it's those kinds of things just stay with you, And here I am.
And you carry him down the road with you, You've seen a lot of.
Listen to the story of Mark Henry. He was the world's strongest man that ended up in the WWE wrestling and stuff. And he didn't get the gold medal in the Olympics. And he later set a lot of records that still have not been beaten to this day. So technically, he's still the world's strongest man. But I
Uh-huh.
saw him being interviewed about not getting the gold in the Olympics. And he said, "Yeah, I didn't get it." He goes, but 3 out of the 4 guys that, placed are all dead now from using those steroids. And I was always
Mhm.
clean. And I would rather lose clean than, so it just takes
Yeah.
some time. You get older and you're like, man,
Yeah.
you just appreciate stuff more
Oh yeah.
older. You
Kirk.
really do. That gratitude comes on strong.
I'm telling you, Teal, this, the last, well, it's been the last 4 years. I've had some pretty raggedy health, heart attack, and quad bypass, and hospitalizations for bleeding intestinal issues, and, just COVID 3 times. Anyway, it was just,
Yeah.
and then I had prostate cancer, just one thing after another. And I survived it all, right? I'm still standing. I feel really good today,
Good. Good.
But it's like those things put a lot on your mind. You start to wonder. You start to reflect. I mean, number one, I'm 73, so and I guess you could call it retired. I still, sell my pictures and go set up at festivals and stuff like that. And but I've really started to reflect on the life that I've been able to live, and the impact that other people have had on me, and the impact that I have had on other people.
Yeah.
I get that a lot at the gallery. When I'm down there, people will show up and tell me stories about how I threw them out of the building, or I mean, I get a lot of that. I get a lot of, "You gave me some great advice," and then the other guy will go, "I was on stage at the Beacon. You threw me out." I said, "Well, you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, Hoss." But you get that notion of how you've impacted the world that you live in, and I'm it's here's an interesting little thing. In Labor Day weekend this year, I was inducted into the Iowa State Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
think I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It was Labor Day weekend. I drove up there. They had a big ceremony. There was a bunch of people, and there's been some serious players come out of Iowa, and they're all in, and they've been doing this for 25 years, and
Nice, man.
so and I was in the associate, I don't know, some kind of category. It was like there was a guy that worked sound, and another guy was an engineer, and then me as a photographer, and I hadn't lived in Iowa since 1969. I grew up there,
I hear you.
but it was very cool. I'm getting
Yeah.
acknowledgement for the shit that I created along the way, and I've impacted, and it's a cool thing, and
Yeah, man.
so I look and say, I have pretty much done the right thing in this little life of mine. And the day that, going back to the big house for a second, we were kind of written out of the story for a few years, and then about 5 years ago, maybe, they put a plaque on the front porch,
Yeah.
outlining what Kirsten and I had done.
Yeah.
And it was the same night that Haynes was doing an acoustic show in the backyard. So it was all
nice.
very, it was all very cool. Yeah. And
It's
Super
a marathon, huh? Not a sprint, I guess, is the moral.
yeah, it's exactly right, man.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
The long game.
This
dude.
has been such a cool chat, and we have to have you back one day. Would you come back and tell more? I mean, I feel like we've barely scratched the surface.
Yeah,
Sure,
we didn't even get the Chicago Blues stuff. Which
Where can
I've
everybody
heard so
find
many
your-
great stories about that stuff?
We'll post a link to every places where people could find your art and all of your stuff. But man, Kirk, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. And I'll do it. I'll do a part 2. Talk
Hell
about
yeah.
Chicago. Talk about
Well, we got to
Chicago
do,
blues.
because the country guys and the blues guys. I got to ride on the bus with you, and I got to hear all the stories. But This is great stuff. You're always in my Hall of Fame, brother.
Thank you, brother,
Always.
man. You too. I love you, Oteil. I mean, we've traveled some miles together, man, and
Yeah.
it's you were the easiest bass player I ever worked with, to be honest with you.